It was a winter night in Moscow. An old KGB general fastens his coat, unaware that somewhere, far beyond the shadows, an enemy watches. Days later, in the comfort of his office, a routine cup of tea leaves him trembling. Darkness descends inside his own world, and questions spiral. How could death touch him so personally when no enemy ever came close? This is the story of a Mossad operation woven in such silence and distance that its victim never saw the hand that reached for him. A poisoning with no bullet, no struggle, not even a handshake. The deep undercurrents of the Cold War bore witness to a silent rivalry between two of the most formidable intelligence agencies ever known. Behind the closed doors of leafy embassies and dimly lit rooms, Mossad and the KGB wove intricate webs of espionage, counter-espionage, and tactical warfare. This invisible war was fought not with armies, but through secrets, surveillance, and subterfuge. The confrontation between these two giants stretched across decades, spanning continents and touching every corner of global politics. While the world watched the public theater of diplomatic summits and military posturing, the real struggle unfolded in the margins, in encrypted cables and dead drops, in safe houses, and sudden disappearances that never made headlines. Each agency had cultivated a reputation that inspired both admiration and terror. The KGB, with its vast network extending through every layer of Soviet society and reaching into foreign capitals, represented the iron fist of communist power. Mossad, smaller but surgically precise, had earned its legend through operations that seemed to defy possibility, reaching targets thought to be untouchable. The rivalry was personal in ways that transcended politics. Officers on both sides knew their counterparts by reputation, if not by face. They studied each other's methods, anticipated each other's moves, and respected each other's capabilities even as they plotted mutual destruction. This was not merely institutional competition but a duel between philosophies, between the brute force of totalitarian control and the surgical precision of democratic survival. Every agent recruited, every operation executed, every piece of intelligence gathered was a move in an endless game where the stakes included not just national security but the very survival of people and nations. At the heart of this contest was a man, a high-ranking KGB general whose lifetime in the Soviet intelligence apparatus made him both a custodian of dark secrets and a potential liability. He was rumored to be engaged in dealings that threatened the delicate balance of power, specifically attempting to pass on chemical weapons knowledge to foreign entities. For Mossad, this leakage represented an existential threat to national safety and international stability. Israel, surrounded by hostile neighbors and constantly under threat of annihilation, could not afford to let such weapons fall into the wrong hands. The general's activities threatened to tip the balance in a region already soaked in blood and conflict. Every move in this chess game had to be measured and precise. Mossad could not afford the luxury of direct confrontation. An open attack would spark international outrage, potentially triggering a diplomatic crisis that could isolate Israel on the world stage. The Soviet Union, despite its internal troubles, remained a superpower with the capacity to retaliate in ways both overt and covert. Their goal was to neutralize the general without igniting full-scale political backlash or endangering their own agents positioned deep inside Soviet borders. These agents, some of whom had spent years building their cover identities, represented investments of time, money, and human courage that could not be casually sacrificed. This was a battle of whispers and shadows, a contest of strategy at the highest stakes. The planning required consultation across multiple departments within Mossad. Analysts pored over intelligence reports, building psychological profiles of the target. Operational planners sketched scenarios, wargaming every possible outcome. Scientists were consulted about methods and means. Legal advisors weighed the international ramifications. At the highest levels, political leaders had to give their blessing, understanding that success would bring security, but failure could bring catastrophe. The decision to proceed came only after weeks of deliberation, each voice heard, each risk calculated, each moral dimension examined, even if ultimately set aside in the face of perceived necessity. To understand the full weight of what Mossad faced, one must peer into the world the general inhabited. The KGB was more than an intelligence agency. It was a ubiquitous presence that permeated every aspect of Soviet life. Its influence extended from the highest corridors of the Kremlin to the humblest village square. Informants riddled every institution, every workplace, every apartment block. Citizens learned to speak in coded language, to trust no one completely, to understand that the walls themselves might have ears. Within the ranks of the KGB, this culture of surveillance intensified to suffocating levels. Officers spied on each other as readily as they spied on foreign adversaries. Loyalty was tested constantly, not just through official evaluations, but through whispered rumors and sudden interrogations. A careless word at a party, an unauthorized meeting, or even an unexplained absence could trigger an investigation. The KGB devoured its own with the same ruthless efficiency it applied to enemies of the state. Purges swept through its ranks periodically, removing those suspected of disloyalty, corruption, or simply of knowing too much. Careers built over decades could vanish overnight, and careers were the least of what could be lost. Imprisonment, exile, or execution awaited those who fell from grace. The general's daily existence was one of relentless vigilance. He led a life bound by secrets, blocked from genuine trust by the very institution he served. His every step was watched, every conversation potentially recorded by unseen ears. In this world, paranoia was not paranoia but a survival instinct. He knew that his colleagues envied his position and would gladly step over his corpse to claim it. He knew that his subordinates feared him but might betray him if they sensed weakness. He knew that his superiors valued his skills but would discard him without hesitation if he became a liability. His days followed rigid patterns, each routine designed as much for security as for efficiency. He arrived at his office at the same time each morning, driven by a trusted aide who had been vetted and re-vetted countless times. He ate lunch at his desk or in the secure cafeteria reserved for senior officers. He attended meetings in rooms swept for listening devices, though everyone assumed such sweeps were merely theater, that the true surveillance was too sophisticated to detect. He returned home each evening to a guarded apartment, where even his family could not be fully trusted. His wife knew better than to ask about his work. His children had been taught from infancy that their father's profession was a subject never to be discussed outside the home. Although his position carried enormous power and access, it also carried serious dangers. The KGB was known for its ruthless cleansing of perceived traitors, and any deviation from its strict discipline invited deadly retribution. The general had witnessed colleagues disappear without explanation, their names erased from records, their families left to wonder and whisper. He had himself signed orders that sent men to their deaths, men who had once been friends or mentors, men whose only crime was to be on the wrong side of an internal power struggle or to possess knowledge that someone wanted buried. He carried these ghosts with him, a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. Yet the general was suspected of selling secrets, a dangerous game that made his position precarious not just for him but for the entire network of Soviet intelligence. If the whispers were true, if he truly was attempting to profit from his access by selling chemical weapons knowledge, then he was playing the most dangerous game imaginable. Such betrayal struck at the heart of the Soviet system, which depended on the absolute loyalty of its security apparatus. His actions, if discovered, would trigger not just his own destruction, but a wave of suspicion and purges that would tear through the ranks, destroying careers and lives indiscriminately as the state apparatus struggled to identify who else might be compromised. The irony was bitter. The very surveillance state he served now worked against him. Every transaction left traces. Every meeting was noted. Every communication was potentially monitored. If he was indeed selling secrets, he was doing so in an environment designed to make such activity nearly impossible. The audacity of it suggested either supreme confidence or desperate recklessness. Perhaps he believed his position and his skills made him untouchable. Perhaps he had grown so cynical about the Soviet system that he no longer cared about its survival. Or perhaps, as some speculated, he was motivated not by greed but by ideology, believing that spreading these weapons would somehow serve a greater good, whether the destruction of capitalism or simply the chaos that he thought might birth a better world from the ashes of the old. The unfolding of this mystery began with whispers of betrayal, faint signals in the vast ocean of intelligence that Mossad collected and analyzed every day. Israeli intelligence operated a sophisticated network of human sources and technical surveillance across the Middle East and beyond, always searching for threats to national survival. The first hints came from an unlikely source, a defector from a Middle Eastern regime who mentioned in passing during his debriefing that his country had been approached about acquiring Soviet chemical weapons technology. The details were vague, but they were enough to trigger alarm bells. Israeli intelligence officers began pulling threads, carefully and quietly. They reviewed intercepts from months past, looking for patterns they might have missed. They reached out to sources, asking questions framed in ways that would not reveal what they were truly seeking. Slowly, a picture emerged. Communications intercepted and decoded revealed discussions of technical specifications, delivery systems, effects, and countermeasures. The knowledge being offered was detailed, current, and could only have come from someone with high-level access to Soviet military and intelligence secrets. Human sources, cultivated over years at great risk and expense, painted a disturbing picture. The general was actively attempting to sell critical Soviet chemical weapons knowledge. Multiple sources, operating independently and unaware of each other's existence, provided information that corroborated and expanded on what the technical intercepts had revealed. The general had made contact with representatives from several nations hostile to Israel. He was offering to provide not just theoretical knowledge, but practical guidance on weaponization, delivery systems, and defensive countermeasures. He was selling the keys to weapons of unparalleled destructive power. The implications were staggering. Chemical weapons had haunted humanity since the trenches of World War I, when chlorine and mustard gas had turned battlefields into zones of choking horror. The technology has advanced significantly since then. Modern nerve agents could kill in minutes, could penetrate protective gear, and could persist in the environment for days or weeks. They could be delivered by artillery, by missiles, by aircraft, even by covert operatives armed with nothing more than a spray bottle. In the hands of hostile regimes, such weapons directly threatened Israel's existence. The country was small, its population concentrated in a few urban centers. A coordinated chemical attack could kill thousands or tens of thousands before any defense could be mounted. Israeli military and intelligence analysts ran scenarios, wargaming the possibilities. The results were uniformly grim. Even with Israel's substantial defensive capabilities, including gas masks distributed to every household and shelters built beneath every building, a surprise chemical attack would cause massive casualties. And once these weapons were in the hands of hostile states, they could not be uninvented. They would remain a permanent threat, forcing Israel to maintain eternal vigilance and accept that its civilian population lived under a sword that could fall at any moment. Diplomatic efforts to dissuade or capture him quietly had failed. Israeli officials, working through carefully chosen intermediaries, had tried to warn the Soviets about the general's activities. The messages were crafted to be deniable, framed as intelligence sharing rather than accusation. But the Soviet response was silence. Perhaps they did not believe the reports. Perhaps they were conducting their own investigation and wanted no interference. Perhaps the general had powerful protectors who were shielding him. Or perhaps, most troubling of all, elements within the Soviet leadership actually approved of his activities, seeing the spread of these weapons to Soviet client states as serving their strategic interests, even if it violated international norms and agreements. Attempts to approach the general directly, to threaten or bribe him into stopping, were deemed too risky. He was too well protected, too alert to such approaches. Any attempt to make contact would likely trigger a counterintelligence investigation that could roll up Israeli networks inside the Soviet Union and allied states. Assets that had taken years to develop would be lost. Worse, such an approach might accelerate the general's activities, prompting him to conclude deals quickly before he could be stopped. The general appeared untouchable behind layers of political protection and Soviet state power. He moved through a world of armed guards and surveillance, his movements monitored, his contacts screened. Any abduction attempt was impossible. Israel had proven its capability to reach out and capture enemies, most famously when Mossad agents had snatched Adolf Eichmann from Argentina in 1960. But Argentina was not the Soviet Union. There was no way to extract someone from Moscow, no way to spirit a high-ranking KGB general across Soviet borders without triggering a massive manhunt and potentially an international crisis that could lead to open conflict. Mossad recognized that a more direct approach was necessary to protect their country and interests. The discussions at the highest levels of the Israeli government were intense and sobering. No one undertook such an action lightly. Assassination of a Soviet general would be an act of war by any conventional definition. If discovered, it could lead to retaliation against Israeli officials or citizens abroad. It could poison relations with other nations, who might fear they could be next. It could undermine Israel's standing with its allies, particularly the United States, which might view such action as destabilizing and reckless. But the alternative, allowing chemical weapons to spread unchecked to Israel's enemies, was deemed worse. The calculus was brutal but clear. One life, however protected, against thousands or tens of thousands. One act of violence in the shadows against the potential for mass destruction in the sunlight. The decision was made. The general would be eliminated. Such action required the utmost precision. An assassination would spark diplomatic uproar if it were obvious. A bomb or shooting would leave evidence, bodies of guards or bystanders, physical traces that forensic investigators could analyze. And direct violence on Soviet soil was almost impossible without grave consequences. The KGB would launch a massive investigation, rounding up anyone with possible connections to Western intelligence. Soviet client states would be put on alert. Israeli agents and sympathizers would be in mortal danger. Mossad's innovation and stealth were tested to the limit, tasked with creating a method that could kill from afar without evidence or exposure. The operational directive was clear but seemed almost impossible. They needed to eliminate a target who never left secure locations, who was surrounded by guards and watchers, who lived in a society where foreigners were immediately suspect and any unusual activity was reported to authorities. They needed to do it in a way that would appear natural, or at least ambiguous, that would not immediately trigger suspicions of assassination. And they needed to do it without risking their own agents or compromising their networks. Undeterred, Mossad's scientific minds began their search, consulting with chemists, toxicologists, and medical experts. The organization had long maintained a sophisticated scientific division, recognizing that modern intelligence work required mastery not just of human psychology and operational tradecraft, but of technology and science. Over the years, Mossad scientists had developed numerous tools of the trade, from sophisticated listening devices to specialized weapons to, yes, poisons and their delivery systems. They needed a substance that combined several rare qualities. First, it had to be deliverable covertly, capable of being administered without the victim's knowledge and without requiring direct physical contact between agent and target. Second, it had to act slowly enough to mimic natural decline, creating symptoms that could be mistaken for illness or age-related deterioration rather than acute poisoning. Third, it had to defy detection by Soviet medical technology, which, while not as advanced as Western medicine in many areas, was still sophisticated, particularly when it came to analyzing suspicious deaths of important officials. Fourth, it had to leave no trace pointing back to its source, no chemical signature that would say manufactured in Israel or even manufactured in the West. The research took weeks, examining compounds both known and exotic. Radioactive materials were considered but rejected as too detectable and too dangerous to handle. Biological agents were similarly dismissed due to their unpredictability and the risk they posed to innocent bystanders. Traditional poisons like arsenic or cyanide were too well known and too easily detected. The breakthrough came when someone suggested looking at substances that occurred naturally in the human body or in common foods, but which became toxic in larger quantities or in modified forms. The solution lay in a rare, specialized compound that could be administered through an everyday item, commonly consumed, even trusted. The exact nature of this compound remains classified, locked away in Mossad's archives, a secret that will likely remain buried for decades, if not forever. But its properties can be inferred from what happened next. It was stable enough to survive in the delivery mechanism without degrading. It was tasteless and odorless. or at least subtle enough that any slight change could be attributed to normal variations in food or drink. It was absorbed readily into the bloodstream. And once in the body, it began a slow, progressive disruption of vital systems that would appear to medical observers as organ failure or systemic illness. The toxin had to slip past surveillance, contaminating neither environment nor corpse with obvious signs of foul play. This meant it could not leave behind residues that would be detected by the routine chemical analysis performed on surfaces in secure locations. It could not create dramatic, sudden symptoms that would immediately scream poison. Instead, it needed to be subtle, patient, working over days or even weeks to create a cascade of medical problems that would seem like the tragic but natural failure of a body under stress. The famed Russian ritual of drinking tea carried the perfect cover. Tea was universal in Soviet culture, consumed throughout the day in offices and homes, a social ritual as well as a source of warmth and comfort. It was personal and routine, something the general would consume without suspicion or hesitation. Contaminate the cup or pot, and the poison reaches its target unnoticed. The heat of the tea might even help the compound dissolve and be absorbed more quickly. And because tea had its own strong flavor, any slight taste from the toxin would be masked or attributed to a new blend or poor quality leaves. But how to contaminate the tea without being detected? This puzzle consumed the operational planners for days. They could not simply have an agent pose as a waiter or servant, someone who might pour the tea. The general's office was staffed entirely by long-serving, thoroughly vetted personnel. Any new face would be noticed and questioned. They could not break into his office at night to contaminate his tea supplies, as the office was locked and alarmed, checked regularly by security sweeps. They could not even reliably contaminate the water supply to the building, as this would risk poisoning innocent people and would also be too diffuse, potentially not delivering a lethal dose to the target. Delivery presented its own challenges. The poison had to be introduced without any physical encounter between agent and victim, avoiding the possibility of being traced. After extensive surveillance and analysis, the operational team identified a vulnerability in the supply chain. The general, like many senior Soviet officials, received certain personal supplies from a special store that catered to the elite. Among these supplies were imported teas, small luxuries that marked status and privilege. The store itself was secure, but the delivery system was less so. Packages were transported by a dedicated courier service, yes, but these couriers were merely well-vetted citizens, not intelligence professionals. They followed routes, made multiple stops, and sometimes left packages briefly unattended. Mossad operatives meticulously studied the general's daily habits, trusted aides, and office routines to identify the moment and method of insertion. They photographed the couriers, learned their schedules, and identified which one was delivered to the general's office. They observed the packaging used, the seals applied, and the inspection procedures when packages arrived. They noted that while packages were indeed inspected upon arrival at the office, this inspection was cursory, focused on ensuring nothing overtly dangerous or suspicious was present, rather than on detecting sophisticated chemical contamination. A plan took shape. A Mossad agent, operating under deep cover in Moscow, would intercept a package during delivery, substitute the tea, and return the package to the delivery stream. The interception would take only moments, occurring during one of the brief windows when packages were left unattended. The substituted tea would be identical in appearance to the original. The packaging carefully replicated down to the smallest detail, using materials and techniques that would pass inspection. Inside the innocent-looking tea leaves, death would wait patiently. Weeks of patient surveillance preceded the fateful day. Mossad operatives, cloaked in the fabric of Moscow's bustling streets, tracked the general's schedule with obsessive precision. Every movement was mapped, every contact noted, every routine analyzed for patterns and vulnerabilities. This was dangerous work, conducted in one of the most surveilled cities on Earth. The operatives were professionals, trained to blend into their surroundings, to adopt the mannerisms and attitudes of ordinary Soviet citizens. They dressed like Muscovites, spoke fluent Russian with appropriate regional accents, and carried identification documents that would pass inspection. Some had been positioned in Moscow for years, living entirely normal lives as teachers, clerks, or factory workers, waiting for the moment when they would be activated for an operation like this. They worked in shifts, maintaining coverage but avoiding the pattern of having the same faces appear near the general too frequently. They used a variety of observation posts, from park benches to cafe windows to parked vehicles, always changing positions, never establishing a routine that Soviet counterintelligence might detect. They communicated through dead drops and coded messages, never meeting face-to-face unless absolutely necessary, maintaining operational security even among themselves. Each observer knew only their small piece of the puzzle, limiting the damage if any one of them was captured or compromised. Carefully planned agents ensured their actions remained undetected by Soviet counterintelligence professionals. This was the nightmare scenario that kept operational planners awake at night. Soviet counterintelligence officers were skilled and experienced. They knew all the tricks because they used the same tricks themselves when operating abroad. They watched for foreigners showing too much interest in sensitive locations. They monitored communication patterns, looking for unexplained contacts or coded messages. They cultivated informants in every neighborhood, every workplace, every apartment building, creating a web of observation that was nearly impossible to evade entirely. But nearly impossible is not the same as completely impossible. Mossad's advantage lay in patience, and in the fact that Moscow was a city of millions, with countless people moving through its streets every day. Individual surveillance could be spotted, but a careful, diffuse observation pattern spread across multiple agents who never appeared together and who took days or even weeks to gather necessary information could slip through the net. The key was discipline, never pushing too hard, never taking unnecessary risks, and accepting that some opportunities would be missed rather than exposing the operation. The day of insertion arrived in late autumn, when Moscow's weather turned gray and cold, when citizens hurried through their routines with heads down against the wind, when attention naturally turned inward rather than outward. The courier followed his usual route. A middle-aged man who had made these deliveries hundreds of times, who saw them as nothing more than a job that paid slightly better than factory work and came with certain small privileges. He had no idea that today his routine would be interrupted, that he was an unwitting participant in an operation that would reshape intelligence history. The interception occurred in a building lobby, in the brief moment when the courier set down his packages to check his delivery list. A Mossad agent, posing as another delivery person, created a momentary distraction. In the few seconds while the courier's attention was diverted, a second agent switched the packages. The original was spirited away, the substituted package left in its place. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. The courier, none the wiser, continued his route, delivering the contaminated tea to the general's office later that morning. The contaminated teacup was introduced with subtlety, passing through the layers of trust and routine surrounding the general. The package arrived, was inspected by the general's security detail, passed without comment, and was placed on his desk along with other deliveries. Later that afternoon, during a break between meetings, the general opened the package himself, pleased to receive the special imported tea he enjoyed. His aide prepared it according to his preferences, strong and black with just a hint of sugar. The general drank while reviewing reports, barely conscious of the act, his mind focused on the intelligence summaries spread before him. From the moment he sipped the beverage, the toxin began its silent work, entering his bloodstream, beginning the slow process of disruption and decay. He noticed nothing at first. The tea tasted as it should. He felt no immediate symptoms, no burning or numbness or sudden illness. He finished the cup, set it aside, and returned to his work. Over the following hours he drank more, draining the pot his aide had prepared. Each sip delivered more of the poison, building the concentration in his blood, spreading through his organs. Gradual decline followed, a body weakening in ways indistinguishable from the common ailments of age or stress. The first symptoms appeared the next day, vague and easy to dismiss. He felt tired, more so than usual. His appetite decreased slightly. He attributed it to overwork, to the stress of his position, to the cold that seemed to be going around the office. His wife urged him to rest, but he waved off her concerns. There was too much work to be done, too many important matters demanding his attention. But the symptoms persisted and slowly intensified. Within a week, he found himself struggling to concentrate during meetings. His hands trembled slightly when he held papers. He felt intermittent nausea and a growing weakness that no amount of rest seemed to cure. His colleagues noticed, making concerned comments, suggesting he see a doctor. Pride and paranoia made him resist. To admit weakness in the KGB was dangerous. To submit to medical examination meant questions, tests, and records that could be used against him later if rivals sought to have him removed from his position. Finally, when he nearly collapsed during a meeting, he was rushed to a special hospital reserved for senior officials. Soviet medical staff were baffled, unable to pinpoint the cause of his decline. They ran every test in their arsenal, checking for known toxins, for infections, for cancers, for organ failures. They found abnormalities, yes. His liver function was impaired, his kidneys showed signs of stress, his nervous system displayed unusual patterns. But there was no clear diagnosis, no obvious cause that unified all the symptoms. The doctors debated among themselves, proposing theories and counter-theories. Some suggested a rare autoimmune disorder, others thought perhaps a previously unknown virus. A few, more suspicious, wondered aloud about poisoning, but their tests revealed nothing. No trace evidence, no sign of attack, only growing illness. The general deteriorated over weeks, his body betraying him system by system. He lost weight dramatically. His skin took on an unhealthy pallor. He suffered episodes of confusion and memory loss. The best doctors in Moscow attended to him, but they could only treat symptoms, not the underlying cause they could not identify. In his more lucid moments, the general wondered if this was retribution, if his own activities had somehow been discovered, if this mysterious illness was the KGB's way of dealing with him without public scandal. Or perhaps it was simply fate, the body's rebellion after years of stress and secrets. This invisibility was the operation's greatest weapon. Suspicion within the KGB grew, but the source remained a mystery. Senior officials convened emergency meetings, demanding answers. How could a high-ranking general sicken and die without explanation? Was it a natural illness, genuinely mysterious? Or was it an assassination? And if so, by whom and how? Counterintelligence launched investigations, reviewing security footage, questioning staff, and analyzing the general's movements and contacts. They found nothing. No suspicious meetings. No unauthorized access to his office. No evidence of tampering with food or drink. The investigation consumed resources and manpower, but produced only frustration. Some within the KGB suspected Western intelligence, though they could not prove it or even imagine how such an attack had been executed. Others believed it might be an internal purge, someone within the Soviet leadership eliminating the general for reasons of politics or personal rivalry. This suspicion poisoned relationships at the highest levels of Soviet intelligence, as officers wondered who could be trusted, who might be next. The uncertainty was perhaps as damaging as the general's death itself, creating an atmosphere of fear and paranoia that paralyzed decision-making and undermined operational effectiveness. The general died 43 days after drinking the poisoned tea. His death was officially attributed to acute organ failure of unknown etiology, a diagnosis that satisfied no one, but could not be challenged without evidence. The state funeral was conducted with appropriate honors, his service to the Soviet Union praised in speeches that carefully avoided any reference to the mysterious circumstances of his death. The general's death sent ripples through Soviet intelligence. High-ranking officials reacted with fear and suspicion. If the general could be struck down so mysteriously, who else might be vulnerable? What other operations might be compromised? The KGB launched purges and intensified internal surveillance to root out possible traitors or foreign agents. Officers found themselves subjected to increased scrutiny, their finances examined, their contacts questioned, and their loyalty tested through loyalty interrogations and forced confessions. Some were arrested on flimsy evidence, their careers destroyed, their lives ruined. Others fled, defecting to the West, or simply disappearing into the vast Soviet interior. The atmosphere within Soviet intelligence became toxic. The impact extended beyond the KGB itself. Soviet client states began to question the security of their relationships with Moscow. If Soviet intelligence could not protect its own senior officials, how could it be trusted to protect Allied leaders? Some regimes began cultivating alternative relationships, hedging their bets, preparing for a world where Soviet protection might not be reliable. Mossad had succeeded without firing a shot or leaving a signature. The operation struck terror into the hearts of other would-be defectors or secret dealers. The message was clear and terrifying. No one was unreachable. No amount of security, no fortress of guards and surveillance could guarantee protection against an enemy willing to be patient and creative. The operation's success resonated through Western intelligence communities as well. American, British, and French intelligence services studied what details they could gather. Yet the mission weighed heavily on those who orchestrated it. The officers who had planned and executed the operation were professionals, not sociopaths. They had just killed a man, albeit an enemy and a threat. The risk of escalation with one of the world's superpowers and the blurred line between justice and assassination sparked internal debate. Some argued that the general had been engaged in activities that threatened thousands or millions of lives, that removing him was not murder but a defensive act of war. Others questioned whether such extrajudicial killing, without trial or even formal accusation, represented a dangerous precedent, whether it placed Mossad on the same moral level as the terrorists and dictators they opposed. For Mossad as an organization, the operation was a grim necessity in the landscape of ruthless survival. Israel existed in a hostile neighborhood, surrounded by nations that had repeatedly sought its destruction. Conventional morality, the luxury of courts and trials, and due process were privileges that belonged to nations whose existence was not constantly threatened. Israel, in this view, had to operate by different rules, had to be willing to do what others found distasteful, because the alternative was annihilation. The debate within Mossad and within the Israeli government more broadly reflected a tension that has always existed in democratic societies forced to operate in the shadows. How much moral compromise is acceptable in defense of survival? Where is the line between necessary action and war crime? These questions had no easy answers, and the operation against the Soviet general became a case study that would be examined and re-examined for decades. In Western intelligence circles, speculation ran rampant. Journalists investigated, intelligence analysts wrote classified assessments, and academics produced papers examining the incident from historical and ethical perspectives. While no official confirmation emerged from Israeli sources, and likely never will, the bald facts matched Mossad's known capacity for silent surgical strikes. The episode fed a mythos of invisibility and precision around Israeli intelligence, enhancing both its deterrent value and its operational mystique. This operation exemplifies the cruel artistry of espionage, where science becomes a weapon and psychological warfare is fought in lurid silence. Its echoes are felt in countless missions where poison has served as an assassin, a trigger of political purge cloaked in medical mystery. The history of assassination by poison stretches back millennia, from ancient Roman emperors eliminating rivals to medieval courts dispensing death in wine goblets. But modern intelligence services brought new sophistication, combining chemistry and biology with operational tradecraft to create weapons that were nearly undetectable and deniable. The Soviet general's death became part of a grim lineage that includes other famous poisonings in the intelligence world. From the Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov to more recent cases involving nerve agents and radioactive substances, poison has remained a tool of choice for states. Ethical questions linger around this operation and others like it. The use of assassination without trial or transparency challenges notions of law and morality that underpin democratic societies. The general, whatever his crimes, was never formally accused, never given opportunity to defend himself, never subjected to any legal process. He was simply eliminated because a foreign government decided he posed a threat. This kind of action, if widely accepted, undermines the international legal order and invites retaliation in kind, creating a world where states murder each other's officials with impunity.